Over this past weekend, pro-abortion activists picketed at the homes of Supreme Court justices, which, according to a very straightforward reading of the law, is illegal. You are not allowed to go to a courthouse or a judge's home or member of the court and picket or parade in an effort to change the results of justice or to affect the outcome of justice. And the idea is that due process is more important than your right to protest. So it is complicated. I mean, we have free speech. We have a right to assemble. And there's an interesting question about the founding fathers when they were protesting against the government, but even they recognize, like, hold on there a minute. Like, if a judge is trying to decide something, that you probably shouldn't intimidate through protest. And it makes sense. You are seeking to get justice. Well, in this story from timcast.com, activists at homes of Supreme Court justices have broken a federal law that is very similar to what January 6th protesters have been charged with. My friends, when I see stories like this, it just makes me want to sing that song from Fallout, you know, the not wanting to set the world on fire. I tweet it every so often because the general idea of singing that song is just, we are heading towards some kind of collapse, chaos, fight, civil war, whatever. You know, we were talking to Daryl Davis on Timcast IRL last Friday, and it was an interesting conversation. I mean, Daryl Davis is an overt identitarian, which I didn't realize, and believed in a lot of race-based policies. That to me was actually interesting to realize. But in his conversation, he mentioned Wallace getting shot, you know, segregation, schools, and all that stuff. And this is, you know, it just made me think about the Weather Underground, the bombings, the death. And I have to imagine that for a lot of people who think today is worse than it's ever been, there's an interesting contrast. Based on my view of history, I wasn't alive for any of this stuff. You know, I still think it's worse today in many ways than it has been in the past. Of course, in the past, you've had assassination attempts, you've had assassinations. In only the past several decades, I mean, people have tried to kill presidents. It's kind of crazy. In fact, there were some instances with Donald Trump that were really scary. Some dude with a weapon and things like that. And so we want none of that to happen. We want peace. We want conversation. But now you have these people showing up to the homes of Supreme Court justices, to the homes. What I find interesting here is that this is not someone being physically harmed. It's terrorism. I know. People don't like throwing the T word around, especially following 9/11, the Patriot Act. Terror has been thrown all around to try and justify government action against people who don't like, you know, some policy or, you know, some political action or something like that. But when you start showing up to people's homes, when you start doxing them, when you SWAT them, or have the bomb squad show up, the goal is to terrorize. And while we look at the past, we can see that many people, there was violence, like the Weather Underground, like I mentioned, or what happened to Wallace. I think people realized terror is more powerful. I remember reading about torture, and what they were saying is the fear of torture is more powerful than the torture itself. That when you actually subject someone to pain, they adapt. They try to withstand it, and it's happening now. You're in the moment, and I think about that when, like, you know, getting a shot or getting an IV or something, or getting a needle. The fear, the anticipation of the pain is more powerful than the actual pain. And once you're actually getting, you know, the shot, or, you know, you're getting an IV place or something, you're like, oh, it's not so bad, and then it's done, and you're like, yeah, okay, whatever. So what we get is this. The constant, incessant threat of violence against you and your family. And that's what these pro-abortion activists are doing. Now, of course, on Twitter, you actually have people arguing that it's a good thing. You had a Georgetown law professor saying some protests are correct and aggressive tactics are allowed or good or something. No. This is what you end up with. You end up with these protesters creating a constant sense of dread and fear. Outright attacking someone, well, you get security guards. And maybe you're worried, maybe something will happen. But when they show up to your home, what they're saying is you're not safe. We know where you live, and we will be here outside of your house to create an incessant, persistent, low-level dread that will weigh over you and wear down your heart. So where is this going? Well, we have a couple things. In this tweet from Vince Coglianese, probably pronouncing your name wrong, he says, Shapiro tells me I've heard a rumor that Justice Alito and his family have been taken to an undisclosed location, and all the others have gotten heightened 24/7 security. This was in an interview. Now, this is not confirmed. It's a rumor, but let me just tell you, it's a rumor that makes absolute sense. Why would the justices not have protection after this story dropped? Here's a story from Timcast. Let's talk about where this goes. The pro-abortion activists who gathered outside the homes of conservative Supreme Court justices on Saturday evening appear to have violated a federal statute that is very similar to the one many January 6 protesters remain held on over a year later. The protests were organized by a group called Ruth Sent Us, along with one of Justice Brett Kavanaugh's neighbors, a woman named Lacey Wooten Holway, though it is unclear if they were working together or both just happened to organize protests at his home at the same time. The organization had published the home addresses of the justices earlier this week and called for people to join them to protest against the leaked opinion draft that will overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, I want to pause for just a moment and talk to you about an editorial decision that timcast.com made so you can understand. Pro-abortion activist. We decided, or I should say I decided, I told the newsroom, guys, I don't want to use the terms pro-choice and pro-life. I believe those are political terms that don't actually explain what's happening on either side of this protest. Pro-life is a political term that means anti-abortion. Pro-life people don't like abortion. Pro-choice is a political term that means pro-abortion. I think to myself, what is the goal of using these political terms? Now, the left will say pro-choice or anti-choice, as if to imply that the right are, wardens of A Handmaid's Tale, to put women in red gowns and bonnets and force them to be broodmares for the state. Okay, that is not the actual position of conservatives, who just view unborn babies as living entities worthy of protection and life rights, and they should not be killed. The right, pro-life. Well, what does pro-life mean? It's the pro-life in the specific context of the baby. But what I can't stand about either of these things is that they're just terms meant to make either side seem good in their political argument. Anti-abortion and pro-abortion. This is what they are arguing. That's it. The people who are out here, they could say arguably, like, we are pro-choice, the choice of the woman. And it's like, the choice of the woman to what? It reminds me of those arguments the left often has about the Civil War, when they're like the Confederacy and the people will say, people from the South will say that it wasn't a war fought over slavery. They'll say it was a war fought over states' rights, and they go, a state's right to what? To have slaves. Okay, well, whatever. A woman's right to choose what? To choose an abortion. The right is not saying women shouldn't have a choice on anything. They're saying you shouldn't be able to kill someone else. So the argument makes no sense. And pro-life, I got to say it. Do you oppose killing animals? Are you against the death penalty? It's pro-life in the context of abortion. Therefore, we will just say pro-abortion or anti-abortion, because I don't care for the politicization. I want to know what the core of the argument is. Now, if you show up and your argument specifically is about women having a right to choose, then no one is arguing women should have a right to choose what ice cream they want to buy or who to vote for. That is not an argument here. They're going to say, unless justices who vote to overturn the abortion legislation change their minds, abortion laws will be handed back to the states. Wooten Holloway, a 39-year-old teaching assistant and aftercare staffer, told the Washington Post that if the conservative justices are considering rolling back a precedent that protects what people choose to do with their own bodies, then no home address is out of bounds. You see, this is not the actual argument. And so what we have here is a straw man. It's funny when, Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports was speaking recently on his podcast, and he was like, just let the woman do whatever she wants with her own body. I mean, why are you getting involved in that? I'm a fan of Dave Portnoy. I think he's a cool dude. I just think he doesn't understand the conservative argument. I'm not saying conservatives are right or wrong. I'm saying the conservative argument is it's not her body. Babies have their own bodies. And then the left just argues a woman can choose what to do with her own body. And then there's the question of two life forms sharing one space. And it's like, the left views the unborn baby as not an entity worthy of protection. The right views it as. That's the real argument. The real question is a fetus a human being? I got to tell you, the simple answer is yeah. I mean, at the very least, the left's argument would be the pro-choice or the pro-abortion argument would be that it's not, but it does have the potential to be. So there's interesting questions. Where do I fall? You guys know where I fall. I'm slightly on the pro-choice side, but I'm really disgusted by all of this. You should not be going to judges' homes. You should not have second and third trimester abortions. Maybe there's exceptions for the health of the mother. I think, honestly, the right should just concede the argument on rape and incest, because there's a funny point. It says, despite being less than 1% of the reasons for abortions, they make up 80% of abortion arguments. And that's true. I mean, it's a truism. It's like, you hear it a lot that the left will be like, what about rape and incest? And just say, you're right. There should be an exception for that. And that's actually my view, that if a woman is responsible, did not put herself in this position, something is forced upon her, I don't think the state can mandate that. The argument I've heard from, Seamus, for instance, and other pro-life individuals is that it's your child, though. You should not be able to kill it. And I'm just like, there has to be a right, like you can't force something on someone. And I'll tell you this right away. If the pro-choicers, the pro-abortion, see, I keep doing that, right? The pro-abortion crowd, if they think women have a right to choose, then men should have a right to abort financial responsibility. I think that's 100%. If you're saying that it's the woman's body and she gets to decide what to do with it, the man should be allowed to make an equal decision. That is to say, if the woman, and the left would probably love this, to be completely honest, although they're arguing the inverse. If the woman wants to say, I get to decide and the man doesn't, well, shouldn't the man have the choice as well? Shouldn't men have pro-choice? If the woman can choose to terminate the life and the man can't do anything about it, the man should be able to choose to terminate responsibility for the child, right? Now, ultimately, I think that's just a negative place that won't actually help anybody. And it's kind of one of those arguments where you think it's going to get these pro-abortion, activists to be like, no, you can't do that. When in reality, they'll probably just agree and be like, exactly, that's what we want. They want to create parentless homes. So ultimately, I just think it ends up in a really dark place. I won't pretend to be the arbiter of morality on abortion, because I can't give you all those answers. Now, here's the law. For any of those who are hearing from people who say it's not a violation of federal law, we have 18 USCA 1507 picketing or parading, which reads, whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, or in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent, uses any sound truck or similar device, or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year, or both. Nothing in this section shall interfere with or prevent the exercise by any court of the U.S. of its power to punish for contempt. It's clear. These people are in violation of federal law. They were in violation of federal law when they were banging on the walls to stop Kavanaugh from getting confirmed. Although I suppose it wasn't a court proceeding. This is different. This is overt. Jen Psaki says Biden has no position on pro-abortion activists posting a map of the home addresses of Supreme Court justices. Ruth Senta says whether you're a Catholic for choice, ex-Catholic, or of other or no faith, recognize that 6 extremist Catholics set out to overturn Roe v. Wade at or in a local Catholic church, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let me just point something out. I love this. John Roberts is feckless and pathetic. John Roberts, they're protesting him too, and he's actually on the side of upholding Roe v. Wade. Yeah, court 6-3, but it's a 5-4 vote. That's my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's funny that he's the one who goes like, I don't want to overturn this, and they're picketing him. Dude, wake up to the tribalism. I'd like to show you something. This is a tweet from someone on Twitter by the name of Stonewall 1776, and American history buff patriot, who tweeted a clip from the new Star Trek series. You guys know I'm a big Star Trek fan, but this is actually really funny. He tweets, this is so pathetic. The new Star Trek show depicts what appears to be the January 6th protest leading to the end of the world and the human race as we know it. It is stupid. In this clip from the show, it's, what's his name? Captain Pike. He's talking to some alien race. I guess they have nukes or something. I didn't see the show. It's silly. But he says, I can show you what will happen to your civilization because it happens to ours. He says, it started with a fight for freedoms. And then, what does it show? Amazing. It shows Audit the Vote, January 6th, and then it shows Summer of Love, the George Floyd riots, before he goes on to say the eugenics war. And I'm like, that's really interesting. That's really interesting framing. He then talks about how it ultimately resulted in World War III. And I'm like, let me just pause there for a minute, buddy. How does civil rights protest in the United States result in us nuking someone else? Very poor writing, my friends. Come on, do a better job. You can argue that the conflict in the U.S. weakened it as a power in a multipolar world, resulting in a conflict that ended with the use of nuclear weapons and annihilation of good portions of the planet. Sure. But I do think it's funny that they showed January 6th. Now, Stonewall is criticizing this, but I think there's something else here that's actually quite humorous. They call it a fight for freedom. In the show, they say it started with a fight for freedom, and it shows January 6th. A fight for freedom, huh? That's a funny way to phrase January 6th in the media. Why would someone look at that negatively? I mean, I do think it's silly. But why would someone make the assumption that it was pro-establishment? It then says the eugenics war. Well, we all know that January 6th, whatever it was a failed riot, that some people are being charged with criminal conspiracy. I think some people have pleaded guilty to it. Some people are being acquitted, especially on trespassing and stuff like that, when they were led in by cops. But we'll see how this whole thing plays out. Suffice it to say, those that tried something on January 6th, whatever it may be, they failed. And then you get a eugenics war. Tell me, which political faction were the eugenicists? Oh, it was the progressives. The progressives were the eugenicists. Still to this day, elements of the eugenicist ideology exist within the progressive movement. It is the right that opposes abortion. It is the left. Iceland, for instance, using modern progressive ideology, they say, eliminated Down syndrome. I believe it's Iceland that did that, right? As if people with Down syndrome should not exist. That's not the right's position. The conservative or anti-abortion side is not in favor of just wiping out a type of person. Eugenics exists on the left. So if you take a look at this, whether intentionally or not, Star Trek's created a narrative where it started with a fight for freedom, they call it, which was January 6th. Funny way to frame it. And as we know, January 6th was a riot. It failed. It accomplished nothing. And then you get a eugenics war. If you were to ask me what they've created a narrative is, the right loses, the left wins, the left brings about eugenics wars. It's a TV show. It's silly. Maybe it's nothing, but it's all about a reflection on the modern political sphere. Justice Clarence Thomas says, government institutions can't be bullied. And I believe other justices have come out and said, we're not going to be swayed by public pressure. Thomas didn't directly address the leak of a draft opinion, but he said they won't be bullied. His comments came amid widespread abortion rights protests across the country. We can't, quote, we can't be an institution that can be bullied into giving you just the outcomes you want. The events from earlier this week are a symptom of that, Thomas said at the 11th Circuit Judicial Conference per Reuters. He added that he is worried about a different attitude of the young, which he said fails to show a respect for the law that was sustained by previous generations. I think civil war is coming. I don't think this Twitter thread from this guy, or I'm sorry, this clip from the TV show, I don't think it's wrong. You know, I don't know about World War III or anything, but listen, there's a viral thread where a guy says that he was in his law class and his professor said the leak was an egregious violation and a dangerous precedent for the courts. And this guy goes, you know what's a dangerous precedent? It's taking away the rights of women. And the professor was like, I'm not talking politics. I'm saying for the courts, this was really, really bad. And he goes, you know what's really bad is that women are facing injustice. And the professor was like, again, it's about court proceedings. It's a funny viral thread because the left loved it. And they were like, yeah. The funny thing is, these are young law students. I am warning you now, when the millennial generation takes over the courts, because they're slowly starting to, it's going to be fascinating to see. You're going to get a judge, and we're already starting to see it, where someone's going to be like arrested for self-defense. They're in their home and someone kicks the door in and punches their daughter in the face and then pulls out a knife and he goes, "Stay away from my child," and then bang, shoots the intruder, killing him, and gets arrested for it. And then the judge is going to be like, upon reading the law, it says that is an affirmative defense because this person was clearly about to harm your family. But the person who was breaking into your home was an oppressed person, and you took their life. They were just trying to get food. Life in prison, bang, bang. And the person's going to be like, wait, but the law doesn't say you can't do that. We all know. And they're going to be like, I don't care what the law says. Justice must be served. That's what's going to happen. You're going to see courts where they're going to say, you are a white oppressor. And it doesn't matter what your intent was. You have no right. So the lawyer may accurately argue the law, but I, the judge, reject it. And then you're going to appeal and say this judge was wrong. And the appellate court judge is going to be like, are you challenging the wisdom of peace? And they're going to say something like, oh, it's going to get really good. You're going to get more John Robertses, where they're going to be like, well, the reading of the law may have been wrong. We must take into consideration peace and stability and the importance of maintaining social order. Therefore, I uphold the lower court's ruling. That's where we're heading. It's already this point. I mean, look, if the courts say, here's how we interpret the law, I can respect that, whether it's for or against Roe v. Wade. If the court says, I reject outright what the law says and will issue a verdict as I see fit, that's where we're getting into trouble. And when you hear these progressives, these cultists who are like, women losing their rights is more dangerous than the actual court being maintained. It's like, dude, if the court has already fallen, as it appears to have been today, with the leaking of this information for the first time in history, an initial draft being leaked, the cracks are starting to appear, the fissure erupting in the dam, and the water has begun to burst, and it's only a matter of time before the dam erupts unless emergency repairs are made. But here's my issue. Here's what I see. You have the large dam holding back the floodgates, and cracks have started to appear in it. Why? Because one political faction has been attacking it and trying to damage it. And if you get a swift response from the other side to repair the damage, the left will say, you're attacking our efforts to change the system. And then a battle ensues. And one side will win and one side won't. If the left wins, the dam breaks. If the right wins, they'll have to use very serious tactics against the left, and it'll get brutal either way. But I suppose it remains to be seen. It just keeps getting worse. Wisconsin, Molotov cocktails thrown into an abortion crisis center. Pregnancy centers, pro-life pregnancy centers, anti-abortion. Man, it's getting... I try to avoid these political terms, but it only gets more confusing. Vandalized by the extremists on the pro-abortion side. I'll leave it there. Hopefully it doesn't result in continued decay, but that seems to be happening. Next segment is coming up on this channel at 1 p.m. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.